Steve Dickson.
Steve Dickson.
Steve Dickson.
Steve Dickson.
Steve Dickson. And Steve Dickson.
Steve Dickson.
Queensland One Nation Senate candidate Steve Dickson.
One Nation Senate candidate Steve Dickson.
Queensland Party leader Steve Dickson.
Queensland Party leader Steve Dickson.
Steve Dickson.
Before we get to some interesting photos of you, Steve Dickson.
Party leader Steve Dickson.
Queensland leader Steve Dickson.
And in Canberra, Steve Dickson.
On March 28, 2019, Steve Dickson, who was serving as state leader of One Nation in Queensland, was accused of trying to solicit $20 million from the US National Rifle Association, with the promise he would weaken Australia's existing gun laws. While every Australian media outlet parroted this claim, the proof was yet to be provided in an upcoming documentary produced by Al Jazeera and aired on our national broadcaster, the ABC.
One Nation has been caught trying to trade Australia's tough gun laws for cash from America's most powerful gun lobby, the NRA. But Pauline Hanson's henchmen, who were filmed in an undercover sting, say they've been taken out of context, and some of their comments came after a long drinking session.
It was a sting 3 years in the making, and the target was One Nation. Television network Al Jazeera followed a gun lobbyist.
Roger Muller is the public face of Gun Rights Australia.
As he made deep contacts with America's powerful National Rifle Association.
Roger Muller, GRA. Day one here in Louisville at the NRA conference.
But he was not what he seemed.
We created Gun Rights Australia as a front in order to infiltrate the pro-gun lobby and understand how they operate.
The fake activist then led One Nation Chief of Staff James Ashby and Queensland Senate candidate Steve Dickson on a trip to America to seek donations from the US gun lobby.
With the 2019 federal election looming, both major parties used it as an opportunity to kick their favourite political dog, One Nation, as both they and the mainstream media descended into outright hysteria.
We have wonderfully strong gun laws. They have saved Australian lives. They are an example around the world. And for heaven's sake, don't sell them out.
How dare they seek to trade those for money and votes from a foreign buyer?
I think it was a betrayal of the Australian political system.
But it added fuel to Labor's call for the coalition not to preference One Nation at the May election.
He should just simply say they're going to put One Nation last.
Something the Prime Minister won't do. One Nation's response to being caught soliciting foreign donations is to call on the police to use Australia's foreign interference laws to investigate the TV network.
Who was employed by a Middle Eastern country, Al Jazeera, to come to Australia as a spy to infiltrate into Australian politics.
Perversely, it might do One Nation no damage at all, Pete. Like those who backed Donald Trump, many One Nation voters are deeply suspicious of the mainstream media. They believe it's a creature of the political left and is determined to destroy their heroes. So media attacks on One Nation are seen by its supporters as a sign that the party is doing its job in shaking up the arrogant ruling elites.
The problem was, it was pure fabrication. There was no request of $20 million from the NRA, nor was there any link to the US gun lobby before the meetings orchestrated by Roger Muller and Al Jazeera. But try as they may, Steve Dickson and James Ashby couldn't correct the record. The media wasn't interested. After all, this was election season, and they represented One Nation.
I'm not a gun person, but we do have registered firearms people within our party, and Steve Dickson is that person. We had a state policy in Queensland that we led with in the 2017 state election that was developed by Steve. That policy still stands today. Now, being the expert in guns, I referred Roger Muller over to Steve Dickson.
And how this story continues is Roger Muller got in touch with me. I organised for him to come to my house, but before I did that, I checked him out. I made sure that he is what he said he was, and he'd been operating in Australia for 2.5 years at that time. He'd been to gun shows all over Australia. He'd been to the United States, been to a whole lot of places. And when he rang me, he said, what I want to make sure of is that we preserve the gun use in Australia as they are today.
This was not about sourcing money from the NRA. This was about sourcing technology, sourcing an understanding of how they operate, but never was it about seeking $20 million from the NRA. And the conversations that have been recorded where there is a talk of $10 and $20 million, I'll be the first to admit, we'd arrived in America, we'd got on the Source, we'd had a few drinks, and that's where those discussions took place, not with any potential donors, no one bar Roger Muller, Steve Dickson and myself. And then we were also taken to the Coke Industries meeting later on that week.
That's correct. And just to clarify a lot of this, we've landed in the United States. This trip has been organised by Roger Muller, who again, I want to make this point very clearly, was employed by a Middle Eastern country, Al Jazeera, to come to Australia as a spy to infiltrate into Australian politics. There are many, many things that were videoed, and I believe a lot of those things were taken out of sequence. And I'm going to make this point very clearly. I'm going to apologise to the people of Australia for some of the things that Roger Muller has taped me saying when we were having a few drinks at the bar at our local hotel. And I don't talk like that publicly. We were three men talking together and we were having scotches for about 3 or 4 hours. And that is the truth of the matter. But as far as business is concerned, we've gone to America, we've gone to Virginia, to the NRA headquarters, gone through their museum. It wasn't a secret meeting as was put forward by Al Jazeera last night. I put it on Facebook. I showed the world we were there. Everybody in this country knew we were there. I also did a video at the Lincoln Memorial talking about democracy. So the world knew that we were over there. We never hid a thing. Also a statement was made about the balance of power, that one nation could have the balance of power. And we were asked the question by Roger Muller, what would, how much money would it take for one nation to be successful? And I think I might have said $10 million. And I said if we were fortunate enough to get into government and have the balance of power, we would have the government by the kahunas. I won't use the word that they said last night, it's inappropriate for me to do so, but that means very clearly, and I don't know most men here understand that, that means you've got the balance of power. I do use colourful language in my everyday life. I was born on the land, it is the way I grew up. But there are some swear words that I used in those undercover videos. Again, I apologise to the people of Australia for those use of those words.
Yeah, look, there's no secret that this next federal election is fast approaching, and I think that the timing of this report that came out, considering we went to the United States in September last year, nothing could be more damaging for a political party like One Nation as what we've seen today. And it is the result of a Middle Eastern news agency which has been banned in some of those Middle Eastern countries. And many of those emirate nations do not respect Al Jazeera. In fact, in America, both the major parties have deemed this so-called media organisation as agents of another country, not even media.
They were right. Though our government-funded broadcasters regularly present them as a credible news source, Al Jazeera are so contentious in many countries, they have had to completely rebrand to the more friendly-sounding AJ+.
AJ+. If you've spent time on social media, you've seen their stuff, I promise you. This isn't the work of a scrappy startup in Silicon Valley. AJ+ is bankrolled by the government of Qatar. Never heard of Qatar? Most people haven't. It's a tiny Persian Gulf state with lots of oil money. Billions of dollars they're not afraid to spend on causes they believe in. Causes like the terror group Hamas, which runs the Gaza Strip. Without billions from Qatar and its ally Iran, Hamas would blow away in the next desert sandstorm. But Hamas is only part of Qatar's terror portfolio. The Qatar government bankrolls the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda in Yemen and Syria, radical extremists in Libya, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. In other words, a rogues gallery of murderous Islamist terror groups. Qatar's propaganda arm is the Arab news service Al Jazeera, which it owns lock, stock, and America-hating, Israel-hating barrels. Al Jazeera made a splashy attempt to break into the US media market in 2013. They bought a cable franchise for $400 million from former Vice President Al Gore. They signed up some major American TV journalists and opened up shop in New York and Washington. But the effort failed. Americans just couldn't cozy up to the idea that a news network they had rightly associated with Osama bin Laden could be trusted. But Al Jazeera didn't disappear. They just rebranded into the much nicer sounding AJ+, and they concentrated their efforts on the internet and a market that didn't have a bin Laden fixation, or much connection to 9/11 at all. Young people. And they've been amazingly successful. Their productions are well produced, slick, and left. In fact, they're so left that they make videos railing against leftist white women for being insufficiently sympathetic to leftist women of color, especially women of color who are gay or transgendered. It's hard to ignore the irony that a media operation fully funded by a country that oppresses women and gays makes this kind of content for an American audience. But the irony goes deeper. The young and hip presenters at AJ+ depict America as racist through and through, past and present. Black Lives Matter has no greater media ally than AJ+, nor do avowed socialists like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. AJ+ jumped on her bandwagon early on, making a video in the summer of 2018 about then-candidate Ocasio-Cortez entitled Socialist Rising. Why, you might ask, would the government of a Middle Eastern country care about influencing young Americans? The answer is this. Anything that weakens the US is a victory for them and their radical form of Islam. If they can convince young Americans that the US is a bad place, young Americans are less likely to defend it and less likely to support its efforts to fight Islamic terror. And if America is bad, then anyone it supports must also be bad.
So, look, we're very happy to present to you today. We're happy to answer your questions. We are not hiding anything, and we are very disappointed at the fact that a lot of our comments have been taken out of context. We're also disappointed. No, and we'll get to your questions in a moment. What I'll say to you, well, if you hold tight, buddy, what we'll do, I want to make it very clear that during the course of this trip, we have always acted with integrity, we have always acted within the law, and nothing will change. We will always act that way.
After the two-part documentary was aired, Al Jazeera producer Peter Charlie began to receive criticism for his methods, specifically for violating journalism's code of ethics.
I always argued that I felt that they crossed the line. I felt that, in my view, journalism is about reporting the story, not creating it. And I have no problem with undercover reporting. That's legitimate. There are times when you simply have to go undercover and you've got to hide your identity if you're going to get honest answers. So I have absolutely no problem with that. But where I think Al Jazeera crossed the line was where it came to basically acting as intermediaries. We don't know, and we'll never know, if One Nation would have set up a relationship with the NRA without these guys. I am a friend of Peter's, but that doesn't take away from my concerns around the ethics. There are two other questions. The first is, was it politically motivated, the timing of the release of the story? And I think, I suppose there was some political motivation around the election, but I don't see that as massively problematic, and we all start looking for political stories for elections. And so my biggest concern has always been around the ethics of the way that they handled it. And I still go back to that fundamentally they set this stuff up. They acted as intermediaries. They made the phone calls. They made the connections. They were the middlemen in this. It's okay to pose as a drug dealer when you're watching deals go down. It's something else to be the bloke that transports the drugs in the first place. The problems that we've got as an industry is that we really don't pay attention. We're not paying anywhere near as much attention as we need to be to this stuff. I think that we're losing, we lose public confidence, and that's also what I said at the time. We've lost the kind of public support that we need to win a lot of these arguments, unless we're able to hold those ethical lines. Even if, on the face of it, the stories are somehow politically sexy and popular, I still think we've lost something important. I think this is one of those examples where, even though a lot of people really gleefully rolling in One Nation's discomfort over this, I still think that fundamentally it went too far and in the process damaged journalism's credibility. And I really do think that's a problem that we really have.
During the next 3.5 weeks, the federal election had been announced. Surprisingly, the polls showed the One Nation faithful were standing by their party. Then, on the evening of April 29th, leaked footage of Steve Dickson in a Washington strip club was aired on A Current Affair. The Channel 9 producer of this report was none other than Dan Nolan, the same man who received the alleged leaked footage that would destroy Steve Dickson. Who was his former employer, you may ask? That's right, Al Jazeera.
G'day, Steve Dickson here.
Steve Dickson is Pauline Hanson's right-hand man. Last month, he was embroiled in controversy after being secretly filmed by international media organisation Al Jazeera, seeking donations from powerful gun lobby groups. He survived that scandal, with Senator Hanson providing this ringing endorsement.
I have worked closely with this man for at least 2.5 years. I know his family, and I have stayed at his home. He is a friend.
And so Steve Dickson was back on the campaign trail, trying to secure a seat in the Senate at the upcoming election.
One Nation is surging ahead in the polls.
One Nation's campaign slogan is, "We've got the guts to say what you're thinking." But after this latest scandal, some of its leaders should probably do a lot more thinking before saying anything.
Strip joints here.
This hidden camera footage was filmed by Al Jazeera during their investigation into the American gun lobby.
I've never been to one of these before for a long time.
He's being filmed by Roger Muller, a fake gun lobbyist employed by Al Jazeera as part of their sting.
You haven't been to one of these since you're in the Philippines?
No. Seriously. But we should go whenever I want to, but it's actually better because they dance on top of the bars and they take up everything.
You can see Dickson's unmistakable gold ring that he wears regularly.
So you couldn't do this in Australia?
Probably not a good idea.
There's a reason to come to DC?
Yeah. Well, it's not why I came here, but probably a bonus.
Even as Al Jazeera's chief producer Phil Rees condemned the unauthorised use of the leaked footage, deeming it not in the public interest, the damage was done. Steve Dickson resigned immediately. After nearly 20 years in public service, his spirit was broken, his reputation shattered.
Why were these tapes held for 7 months before they're released now? Because Al Jazeera is saying they never gave you permission to actually film that.
Because they were leaked to us. We certainly didn't pay for them. We covered that last night. You watched our show last night, and so you know that we didn't pay for them. It was a leak.
But you didn't get permission from Al Jazeera to actually...
Well, that's what happens with leaks, Pauline. That's what happens with leaks. I can't tell you why this videotape, why this vision has only just surfaced now.
But Tracy, this one has gone on. This is a sting 3 years in the making to actually discredit One Nation and to pull us down. This was done last September. Now it comes out now, just on the cusp of an election. And it's quite evident in this election because the Libs now are preferencing One Nation below the Labor Party. Why? When I worked so well with them on the floor of Parliament. It happens in every election. Even John Howard said years ago, well, it's the Liberal Party's job to actually discredit or have a go at other political parties. And that's what I feel this is all about. I don't know who's behind it. Someone's behind all this. It really is. You can't tell me why a foreign organisation, foreign country, is interested in Australian politics. That's the big question here. I see farmers that have been forced off the land, kids no hope of future. And I couple this shit all the time and I'm sick of it. Absolutely sick of it. Kevin Rudd goes to a strip joint. You've got Craig Thompson using the credit card of the unions in a brothel. You've had corruption, you've had Eddie Abid, you'd had pedophiles, you'd had everything. But they just sail through it.
Have you said this to Steve Dickson? Have you said this to him? Did you say this to him last night? You'd have been entitled to.
No, I didn't.
Why not?
He's bashing himself around enough. You have no idea, and I'm concerned for that man too.
What has he said to you about it?
He's dreadfully sorry. He apologised for what he's done. He had no intentions of ever doing that to me. He's upset with himself. He did tell his wife's standing by him.
Which is extraordinary, really, isn't it? I mean, if you were his wife, would you stand by him?
You have no idea of the bond that they have. And she trusts her husband. And I'm not going to say any different. It's not my place to say. And if she wants to stand by him, you know, that's her choice. I'm not going to go out criticising him. I didn't with Barnaby Joyce. I never did with Cheryl Kerno or anyone else. So it's not my place.
Nobody's allowed to film anything in this club. We you know, that's strictly forbidden in this club. There's no private rooms, no lap dancing, anything. I think that was just like cherry-picked. We're the only club in the country that doesn't have lap dances, private rooms. Everything is out in the open. We're the only social club. We've been open for 40 years. He came to the most conservative club there is, and this guy just cherry-picked stuff. I could tell. You know, the girl, you know, obviously had a few drinks, but he said what he said, but nothing happened beyond that.
Yeah.
But that was cherry-picked. He was set up, obviously.
What I've learned as a person, because before this, I was just an average person going, and I've learnt a lot through this project. What the main thing I've learnt is that how fragile the Australian democracy can be, and how easily it can be affected. And I just think that it's something as an Australian you take for granted.
"8 months ago, Channel 9 aired leaked footage of Deb's husband, Steve Dickson, drunk in a Washington strip club. Every mainstream media outlet ran this story for 3 solid days. Steve withdrew from the federal election and resigned as state leader of One Nation in Queensland. Neither Steve nor Deb have publicly commented. Until now."
There was no consideration for what really happened. And it was, I guess, a way for them to sell more TV, more radio, more newspapers. And it actually felt like it became a blood sport. How about the women that are involved in these situations have their own voice? Not one of them contacted me, not one journalist, no one. You know what, everyone has a right to say what they want to say, but I think people need to be wary of what they're saying to other people. It can really harm other people. Radio stations, newspapers, television hosts, when the time's right and when it suits them, that they all promote anti-bullying. Well, I tell you what, the way the media behaved towards us personally, that was one of the severest forms of bullying, honest to God. Tracy Grimshaw in particular, how could she stay with that man? How could she be so judgmental? Seriously. And there was a young journalist on the Sunshine Coast, and she said, "I am sick to death of politicians' wives standing up for their husbands." She never phoned me. She never texted me and said, "How do you feel? Why are you standing beside your husband?" I think we've just reached an era where people attack. They don't take a breath for 5 minutes and go, "Wow, how has the media affected this woman?" But no, everyone jumps in, the keyboard warriors. "Oh my God, she should leave him immediately, take him for everything." 34 years of your life comes down to 2.5 minutes of film on television. Oh, quick, pack up, kick him out, sell a house, make a load of dough. Never once did I consider it. Awesome.
There you go, darling.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome. Not in a heartbeat. I know my husband. I've been married to him for 32 years. And I also know Roger Muller. And Roger Muller was in my house and asked me endless questions, and particularly harped at me about my marriage to my husband. And one would consider a perfect marriage. But I guess perfect's different to every relationship. But to me, my marriage was perfect.
This came out, I honestly couldn't believe it, to be brutally honest. You know, like I told Deb about it.
Yep.
I hadn't told Pauline Hanson about it, and I hadn't told anybody else about it because I went out on the grog with a bloke that I thought was just a normal bloke, but he ended up being an undercover agent from a Middle Eastern country who supports terrorism. I wasn't aware. I mean, I'd advise anybody out who are a bit careful who you go out with to get on the grog, because you might be going out with a Middle Eastern agent who's trying to infiltrate Australian politics. Who knows?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when you look at the footage from the strip club,
Yeah.
Steve's talking about Asian women. Roger had sat down, had quite a few drinks with my husband, and Steve was obviously, well, I know, they were talking about Steve's childhood. Yes, he was a young boy, 15, 16, living in the Philippines. He was dating an Asian movie star. Obviously, these are questions, you know, around the little circle. Roger just used it to his advantage. Well, shock. I was in total shock. I woke up and I walked past my front windows, and it would have been about 4 a.m. in the morning, and there was massive lights on full beam facing the house, and there was tons of camera crew. It was like my husband had murdered someone. Like, we'd done something incredible. It was so terrible. And I'm thinking, okay, my husband's been to a strip club, yes. Roger's manipulated it to look a certain way, he's asked certain questions at certain times. It was all orchestrated from Roger's point of view. But the media lockdown that we had 3 full days of media lockdown, then we had 2 full days of what I call tag teaming. We had a car would turn up early in the morning. Obviously, if they needed a toilet break or a snack or a coffee break, a car would come before the next car would leave, and that went on for 2 days because my husband went to a strip club. So, we had choppers going over, drone landed on our skylight. We were in total. It was like we'd done the most horrendous thing in the world. Seriously, it was.
Mentally, it's got to knock both of us around. I mean, I am really finding it difficult to trust people. That's the first thing that's come out of this, which I resent immensely. Secondly, I resent that the media just jumped on this and they took Roger Muller and Peter Charlie's word for it. And the truth be known, Peter Charlie and Roger Muller probably aren't even supposed to be involved anymore, because Al Jazeera said they would never release that tape because it wasn't in the public interest. Somehow a current affair got it, and the people who work for a current affair used to work for Al Jazeera. I mean, 2 and 2 normally add up to 4, and I believe 4 is probably the right answer.
And can I butt in there? My husband's been representing the people of the Sunshine Coast for 19 years of his life, and I swear to God, not one person that ever sat in front of Steve at his office desk asking for help ever said, "Oh, Steve, what's your sexual preferences and what do you do in your spare time before we get started?" Like, seriously?
You know, we have not done anything criminally wrong. We have not been charged with anything. And yes, I went to a strip club, and yes, I got drunk, and yes, I made a fool of myself by saying some stupid things.
Yep.
But I think a lot of people may have done that in their life, and yes, I made a mistake and I've apologised for that. But the only person I've really got to apologise to that for is my wife, nobody else. I used to live in the Philippines, and I was a young man when I was over there, and I got up to a fair bit of mischief as a young bloke. And the truth of the matter is, Roger Muller primed that question. And I use the analogy, it's like asking the general public, do you love your mother? Your answer's going to be yes. The question that he probably asked me that evening, had I, slept with any Asian women? I probably said I have. Yes, there were stupid things said on that evening, and I absolutely apologise for all of the people who had to sit down and endure watching that program on A Current Affair. When A Current Affair played that program, they were advertising it and playing it when children were watching how to make Lego models. Seriously, A Current Affair really need to look at themselves and go, well, why did we play that? And then you need to ask Al Jazeera, are they suing A Current Affair for stealing this information? Are they tracking down the criminals who stole it and passed it on to them? There's a lot of questions to be asked. And at the moment, I'm in the middle of writing a book, both Deb and I, and we're writing it with a ghostwriter at the moment who is a very talented young man. And we want to make sure the real story gets out there and the Australian people can see exactly what happened, because I've never seen anything like this before. I've never had anything like this happen in my life. I hope it never happens to anybody else, but it's got to be fully investigated by the Australian government, and I believe the Federal Police and ASIO, because this will fall under political interference, agents paid by foreign powers. And as Deb articulated very clearly, we received a letter from Doha, Qatar, relating to the Al Jazeera sting. Never come from Australia, didn't come from the United States. Doha, Qatar.
There was no regard for the safety of those women, and some of them could say that their faces were slightly blurred, but those women have identifiable tattoos. And seriously, if those young girls are hiding from someone, an abusive relationship or whatever it may be, or even if they're keeping it from their families, that's what they're doing to earn their money, there was no regard for those girls whatsoever. And the way our media portrayed and kept replaying the footage, they had no regard whatsoever for the girls. All they were hell bent on doing is humiliating Steve. And seriously, I think the media should really consider the harm they may have done to some of those young girls. Well, it's had a huge impact, particularly on Steve. I think it took at least 8 weeks before Steve even left the house, left the property. And I think he's taken little baby steps. Now he's back involved in community organisations again, which is absolutely fantastic. He's had tremendous support. The amount of emails and phone calls from other politicians. Honestly, I had to watch Steve 24/7, and I'm just being honest. Steve would virtually lay on the bed in the fetal position. I would follow him to the bathroom, to the shower. Had I have not been here, especially during the time when the media were camped outside the front of the property, anything could have happened.
Look, that occurrence and the thing that happened to me, and I'm a reasonably strong individual,
yeah.
I was absolutely devastated. I felt destroyed. I felt like I'd had my life taken away from me. I couldn't sleep. I had to go to my doctor to get medication to be able to sleep, because every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was in a nightmare. And I thought, well, if this can happen to me, it's going to happen to somebody else again in the future. And it's so easy for a foreign power, it's so easy for money and the media to be able to absolutely destroy somebody. And I think it's just bloody woeful. And I tell you what, I think it almost drove me to the point of suicide. Yeah. If Deb had not stuck behind me and with me, I don't think I'd be here today. And I mean, the media really need to look at themselves and go, are we really supporting this type of activity going with our own industry? are we really telling the truth, or are we just doing this for the almighty dollar and the bang of the moment? Relating to how to start a massacre, no, we weren't contacted by the ABC at all, or I wasn't contacted by the ABC, not at all. We did get contacted by Al Jazeera, who had written a letter from us addressed Qatar, Doha. You know, we got information from them, and they wanted us to respond to them, but no, we weren't contacted by the ABC whatsoever. The night before, Channel 9 said they were going to air footage relating to a politician in a strip club.
Yes.
And that was it. I mean, I was absolutely shattered when that came out. I'll be brutally frank. I mean, I realised immediately the impact on my family, the impact on the political party that I was with at the time. And I made a decision there and then that I was going to resign from the election because I did not want this flack to flow onto other candidates, onto Senator Hanson, onto anybody within the One Nation Party at that time, but that's what the media wanted. This, to me, was absolute political bastardry by a current affair, in cahoots, I believe, with Al Jazeera, and if Al Jazeera are not suing a current affair, that means they collaborated. You can't have it any other way. They either work together to do this, or I'd love to see the legal case that's going to come of this.
And I think the girls from the strip club in America should sue A Current Affair as well, and the ABC for showing their bodies on television. And I can vividly remember watching a show on Channel 10, Studio 10 I think it's called, and Sandas Diari was on it. And they used one of the hosts and they cut and pasted all these little bits of footage together and they played it on television. And I can vividly remember Sam saying, we can make you look whatever we want to make you look like. And it's so true. And I think there should be a warning to every male and female of all levels of government. I'll give them a tip, never allow a stranger into your home. But, you know, now we live in a world where we have to be that guarded. It's so sad. It's seriously sad.
And look, I think another thing at the moment too, you know, there is a lot going on about media scrutiny, about journalist houses being raided, you know, secret sources and all this sort of stuff. I mean, if journalists and media organisations tell the truth, research a story and tell a story that is based on the truth, I've got no problem with that. But when they make stories up when they can't find one, they air footage that I think is pretty unethical, and you can ask Peter Grest about that because that's what he called the media that was aired by ABC. I think the world would be a whole lot better, and I think journalists would be a whole lot more respected. But at this point in time, I think organisations like Al Jazeera, the ABC and A Current Affair are dragging down the standards of journalism in this country. And I think there's a lot of questions that have got to be asked and a lot of answers that have got to be given before I would, or I believe the Australian public would, give journalists any more power to be able to destroy people's lives and potentially force people to their grave through suicide. Well, the first question is very simple. We didn't understand who was involved, how did it happen, who'd pay for it. Are these people credible? And I've done a lot of research, and I've had
They're far from credible.
A lot of people help us with that research. And when this story comes out in the book that we're writing at the moment, people are going to be absolutely blown away in this country. It's going to be a political bombshell. And I think it's going to change the way the media operate in this country. But the laws that have been put into place as far as foreign interference, there should be people out there that are very scared at the moment because they're going to be dropped right in the middle of this thing. I mean, all I want is an open, transparent media. I don't want a country that we can all be proud to live in. You know, I've taken my medicine. You know, I made a mistake. I allowed myself to get drunk. I said some stupid stuff at a strip club, and the person I've got to answer to is this lady here, my wife, the woman I've loved for 34 years, and that's not going to change. As much as the media tried to destroy my marriage, I didn't want to put that stuff in the air. They did. Al Jazeera, ABC and A Current Affair, I think have got a lot of questions to be asked and a lot of questions to answer. Because if they're not, it's a free-for-all and you can do whatever you bloody like.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get on with my life. I actually like the media, to be honest. I wouldn't mind being a part of the media. I'd love to work. This is my perfect dream.
An honest part of the media.
I'd love to work for the ABC, and I'd love to give people some honest journalism. I'd love to let them know what the middle and the right side of politics are thinking, because they've got 99% of the left. They know what the left are thinking, and they tell you that every day. Just turn on 7:30 report, turn on the ABC, you're going to get lots and lots of left components. I tell you, the ABC, an organisation that is funded by the public for $1.2 billion a year, I think they need to understand what the other 80% of Australians want to hear. They want to hear about, are we going to build water projects like the Bradfield scheme, a hybrid of the Bradfield scheme to drought-proof Australia? Are we going to get cheap electricity that is going to allow old people to turn the heater on in winter and to turn the fan and the air conditioner on in summer? Are we going to allow people to have medical cannabis so that the sick can be looked after at a reasonable price? Are we going to do some of these things to make a country a better place? Are we going to start looking after the homeless? Are we going to start looking after returned servicemen? I want to get my life back, and I wouldn't mind working for the ABC. Just tell them the truth.
Whatever keeps him happy.
Wow. Oh, that's great.
We're going to have a book on the market soon, and I'm going to let you know what the title of it is. It's called As It Is, and it's going to be a really interesting read, and I'd advise anybody out in the Australian public, get a hold of it, because you're not going to read a book like this one anytime soon.